Anybody in Washington, D.C. knows the dirty little secret here is this is Facebook paid for multi-million-dollar lobbying campaign. The fake specificity is designed to exclude the very companies that have lobbied for it. And I say hell no to that system. There is a serious problem here of forced data transfers to the CCP. Deal with it. Deal with it directly. And you know what? If Airbnb or Google or anybody else is ensnared, so be it, because they should be. And the fact that they paid a bunch of lobbyists here more effectively than the other guys should not determine which laws we do or do not pass.
I agree with everything in spirit. I would have one disagree. Well, I would ask you to just laser in on one point here. You said because of TikTok's ownership, not their behavior. Do you actually believe that TikTok's behavior, their algorithms, and how they control content is not at least as egregious as Facebook?
I don't have as much evidence for that. The truth is we don't have as much transparency into TikTok, but the ultimate irony of this, Stephen, is that if you look at the most egregious behaviors in the last 10 years of state actors pressuring a tech company to censor or moderate content in a particular way, engage in persuasion, tilting the scales of elections, engaging in forced data transfers to governments without permission, the places where we have greatest evidence of that, hard evidence, is actually for our U.S. tech companies in Silicon Valley working hand in glove in bed with U.S. deep state
I completely
actors.
agree.
That's where we have the
Not
plainest
just
evidence.
Yes.
And so it's beyond bizarre that where we have the plainest evidence, we turn the other way. But where we have good circumstantial evidence to be concerned, that's where we've created the lightning rod when it advantages the very companies for whom we have the most damning evidence.
All right, folks. So I want to react today to this pretty interesting and I think substantive debate that Steven Crowder and Vivek Ramaswamy recently had over the bill to ban TikTok that passed in the House last week. Now, we did our own video discussing it, and I explained why. Look, I do understand the conservative gripe with TikTok, and frankly, I'm not denying it. I understand the arguments regarding China and the manipulation of information and the stuff that's being shown to kids, although I don't think that's exclusively a TikTok problem. I mean, look at all the other big tech sites that do a lot of the same stuff, including selling our data to China. But still, regardless, I digress. Again, I understand the conservative motive there, but I said at the time this bill passed, anytime that something is bipartisan in DC, anytime that Nancy Pelosi is in favor of something, you have to question it. And I was asking the question, well, if Nancy Pelosi supports a bill to ban TikTok, is it really about banning TikTok because of anti-China reasons? Or is it a push to exert more government control over the internet? And actually, as a matter of fact, when you look into this bill, the gripe that Vivek and I and many others actually had about it is that's exactly what it does. It essentially hands the Biden administration a pretty unilateral power to decide what is a national security threat and what is not. And that's why we as conservatives, who, yes, have criticized TikTok for a long time, are in some cases against this bill. Now, we're going to react today because Steven Crowder has the alternate perspective, arguably maybe the more mainstream right-wing perspective that, hey, TikTok is bad, China and all that, so let's get rid of it. And they had a back and forth here that I think is worth listening to, and nonetheless, if anything, is good reaction content. So strap in. We got a lot to listen to here. So without further ado, let's get into this.
So first of all, TikTok has major problems. I have probably been, if you rewind even a few years, even before I was running for president, at the leading edge of pointing out a lot of the issues with addictive social media across the board, particularly with TikTok, and a position that I've adopted since the start of the campaign. I think I said this on day one, and I maintain today, is that I think there is a reasonable case to be made for addictive social media, algorithmically powered addictive social media, to be banned outright in kids under the age of 16. That would include TikTok. It would also include other platforms. But here's where I land. I prefer to, all else equal, when we have a choice, ban the bad behavior, not the individual actor or the individual company, because that sets a terrible precedent. So there's three major issues with TikTok as I see it, right? I'm not some sort of TikTok fan apologist. To the contrary, we got to see the problem with clear eyes. Problem number one is addictive tendencies in kids. Problem number two is forced data transfers, or the potential of forced data transfers to the Chinese Communist Party. And problem number three is the people who run that platform, which could be the CCP, engaging in system-wide persuasion control, effectively tilting the levers of what people do or don't see.
Sure.
Each of those are three separate problems. Here's my issue with this bill.
And just to make it very clear, because oftentimes recently when I've been getting into discourse with other conservatives about this, they will bring up those same arguments. And so I want to make it clear, our side who's saying that this bill is bad, are not denying any of those problems themselves with TikTok. Okay, so don't come in the comments saying TikTok is bad because of China. Yeah, we know, we agree. TikTok is bad because of its algorithm or, the kids and all that. Yeah, again, we totally agree with that. The problem is not those things. The problem is, those are the problem, but I think honestly bigger problem here is the bill and the fact that it doesn't really address these things. Instead, it again is about what? Government control over the internet, arguably a play for Facebook and Meta. And according to Vivek, it's being heavily lobbied by that group specifically in DC to exert more control and have more of a monopoly over information. And again, it's election year here, so you got to consider what's going on. Why does the Uniparty support this bill?
Is that this neither addresses those concerns, any of them, and I can explain why, while also massively expanding the authority of the federal government, particularly the executive branch, particularly President Biden right now, to be able to censor the speech of political opponents in ways that have nothing to do with TikTok.
Exactly.
So the bill is both over-inclusive while also failing to do the thing that it supposedly is purporting to do. And the reason why is anytime you're in the business of creating a bill to go after one company, one actor, what our founding fathers referred to as bills of attainder, this is a constitutional prohibition anyway. I think there's a good chance this would get challenged in the courts and thrown out for this very reason. That's a formula for abuse. And so I can go into detail on each of those points.
Well, you listed 3 points, right? I believe?
Yeah.
3 points. Number 2, I just want to make sure I have this right. Number 2 was that it is overly expansive. Do I have that right?
I would say just to go clear again, doesn't matter what order we go in. 1 is the addictive tendencies in kids.
Yeah.
2 is forced data transfers to the CCP of U.S. user information. Mm-hmm. And number 3 is broad-scale persuasion, using the tool as a persuasive tool to ideologically shift the U.S. dialogue or discourse in a way that might favor a foreign adversary rather than the United States. So those are 3 independent concerns, which I think are serious.
Yes, no, and I agree with you.
We got to deal with them.
But here's the thing: this bill does address number 2 and 3. It doesn't address the addictive tendencies. It does address 2 and 3, and especially people like I do think. And here's the thing: sitting around with Section 230 and having been banned, demonetized on YouTube, banned from TikTok for literally making fun of Xi Jinping. That's why we were banned from TikTok repeatedly. This is addressed in a way that says, okay, look.
I didn't know that, but that's interesting.
Yes. Yeah, no, exactly. We did a trash TikTok, but it was just trashing the CCP. And we made very clear to say we're not trashing the Chinese people, but the CCP. I mean, a lot completely untoward jokes toward Xi Jinping. I think he's earned it, but that's just me, Mr. Old-Fashioned.
It's disgusting. That's disgusting when China does it. It's disgusting when we do similar things in the United States. I don't know why you're demonetized on YouTube, but I suspect it could relate to speech that the U.S. government finds offensive, and it's bad no matter who does it.
Well, when senators
Right. And that's another important point, I think, is that when we say these things are bad because they happen on TikTok, censorship, the things they're showing to people, it's not a universally TikTok problem. It goes across all the other social media platforms. And by the way, it may be a little bit less direct, but I think it even applies to the China argument. Okay? Google isn't selling our data to Chinese or at least some type of Chinese linked actors. I think that's been kind of proven already, right? I'm sure Facebook is doing it. I'm sure a lot of these things are doing it. So
like Hirono and Pelosi are out there saying Mr. Crowder needs to be banned, and they say he hasn't violated policy, so we'll just remove millions of dollars. However, nothing ever happens with those. This is a rare instance where something can happen, and I would actually argue that the reason this can get bipartisan support is because of the specificity. Because of the specificity that says for foreign adversaries, 20% ownership, if the data transfers occur, if they are headquartered or domiciled in these other countries, it is more specific than, for example, some of the left's legislation of hate speech or misinformation. So it's one of the rare instances. I don't believe in common ground based on a lie.
So if I may push back on that for just a second.
Sure.
So this is an issue near and dear to my heart. I wrote about this in Woke Inc. It is a myth that Chinese ownership of the company is the only source of leverage that China has in order to decide how, say, data is or is not transferred to the behavior of companies.
Right.
To the contrary, we have far greater evidence of even U.S. companies that do business in China handing over U.S. user data to the CCP than we have for TikTok itself. I'll give you a very specific example. Airbnb, a U.S. domiciled company, supposedly with principally U.S. shareholders. A few years ago, solid Wall Street Journal reporting on this. I talk about it in greater detail in my book, Woke Inc., my first one. handing over U.S. user data of its customers. People have probably used Airbnb. The private messages sent between renters and hosts, geolocational data, the private data of U.S. users handed over to the CCP, presumably as a condition for Airbnb being able to do business in China. So the fact that...
Right. So why don't we go after that? In fact, if you look into this bill, it has a lot of exemptions for the behavior of American companies. It's almost like certain American companies, quote unquote, are lobbying to get this passed, but not because of good intentions, not because they're like, hey, made in the USA, screw the Chinese. To the contrary, it's so that they can be selling the data to the Chinese. So this is, again, our problem with this whole thing.
Airbnb isn't Chinese owned, it doesn't stop it from doing that. So my point about this bill being under-inclusive is if the problem is transferring U.S. user data to the CCP, transferring the ownership matters very little as long as there's another lever for actual control over those companies.
I agree
and that's a major problem.
I do agree
I go
with
into
it.
greater detail of other examples.
I agree
so
with
that. I think that the idea that we're just going to, now we change the ownership of this one company, massively expanded President Biden's authority to determine what platform does or doesn't count as being controlled by a foreign adversary to be able to shut it down, I think is a massive civil libertarian risk without really any juice to address the core concern of Chinese leverage over the United States, when in fact that leverage plays out through so many levers other than equity ownership, against the backdrop of the further irony that we have companies from Google to Airbnb that have shown greater leverage to the Chinese Communist Party
Vivek,
than this Chinese-owned company.
If I may push back, I agree with you, by the way. Last time I was in an Airbnb, I found a camera in the two-way mirror. I knew it was the CCP, and I said, get a look, because I'm confident. I'm right at the bell curve of average, but, it's okay. So my point here is I understand that. However, those bills don't exist. TikTok does. There is not... I agree with you. This happens not only with Facebook and with YouTube in the terms that they want their content to be palatable to foreign countries, right? And so they throttle content, just like we saw with the NBA, for example, where they couldn't speak out. They couldn't even acknowledge Taiwan. That happens.
NBA, BlackRock, Disney, you go straight down the list. There's a lot of leverage for expanding into the Chinese market. So we agree on that.
We completely
agree. We don't need to spend a lot of time on that.
But this does...
Your point is this bill does one specific thing. Why not just do this?
There's a starting point, right? You're not going to get a bill that will establish, hey, you guys can't allow this leverage even in catering to the content of foreign adversaries or transferring data. You can get a bill that says...
I think there's a very clean bill that should be passed. This is one that I would vehemently support. I'm not in Congress right now, thank God, but I think I would be able to. If I were, I would push for this. Is a clean bill, irrespective of ownership, irrespective of domicile. It is fundamentally illegal for any U.S. holder of U.S. user data to transfer that data to the Chinese government or its affiliates. Period.
Right.
Put an end to the practice. And that's how we do things in the United States of America. There's an undesired behavior. We go after that regardless of who's actually doing it.
Right.
And that reveals what's really going on, because I do think we're falling for a kind of trick here. One of the people playing the trick is it's a combination of, I think, a Biden-led administrative state that wants to expand its executive authority, an administration that's already been using platforms like Facebook, pressuring them through the back door to go after its political opponents, to expand the range of who they're able to go after. But to bring this full circle, here's the dirty little secret in Washington, D.C. You know who's advocating for this bill? It's really the lobbyists hired by that very company, Facebook. And so we are falling for a Facebook-led lobbying campaign to deflect attention from the reality of Facebook engaging in some of the same behaviors it's accusing TikTok of.
And by the way, who has a lot of, the insider trading thing, a lot of shares in Facebook/Meta? Nancy Pelosi. As a matter of fact, I was looking at, the Nancy Pelosi insider trade Twitter account just a couple days ago and confirmed that she has a lot of shares, and specifically, I believe it's Facebook and Google. She's also a very big supporter of this TikTok bill. Again, you may have your own motive and want to see your own thing done against TikTok, but you also have to consider, if the Uniparty is in favor of it, why do they support it? I'm going to keep coming back to this. This is the important question. And as I will say again, I think when you look into this bill and what it actually does in terms of basically giving Biden the power to control it all, you see what this is really about. It's about free speech. It's about being able to control the internet, the information, the things that are seen on it.
Getting in bed with the government actor, not quite the CCP here, but the the deep state in the United States of America, doing the same thing, deflecting attention, effectively sidelining one competitor while actually being the product of one company's self-interested lobbying, as opposed to a full-fledged ban of the underlying behavior that actually would ensnare Facebook and Google and Airbnb, but which those companies have effectively lobbied their way out of being.
Well, that's the point, though, right?
by.
Nothing's going to happen there. You're not going to be able to. Here is a bill where something can happen. In other words, how would bringing TikTok under a U.S. entity, right, hinder our ability to restrict data? It's a step. You're not going to get. This is the same reason that the Democratic, by the way, I'm agreeing with you, the radical left Democratic wing opposed this bill, the AOCs of the world. Why? Because they love being favored by the algorithms of Facebook and X.
That's independent reason.
Sorry, not X, but what used to be Twitter, right, at one point in time, YouTube, of course. But at this point, there's something before us that says, okay, here's a way to take a step. And by the way, President Trump supported it back then until he was against it. I'm sure that you've heard people say.
First of all, Well, I would say one thing about that. Federal courts rescinded that ban, right? And I do think that federal courts, and I think the Supreme Court, will come down against this one as well for some of the same reasons. Came down against that because that was an executive order, but it will come down against this one in part because of the expansive abuses inherent in a law that's this vague and this broad, directed effectively at one company that vests this much authority in the chief executive and the president. And I don't think we do ourselves any favors by saying, oh, there's a bill only to see it rescinded, just like it happened last time around by the Supreme Court or by federal courts. I think that there's an opportunity where if you're just a consumer, and I take an average person home and say, okay, something's come up, why not just sign that? I'm interested in the process by which it comes up.
Well, they rescinded, just to be clear, they rescinded the bill. I want to be clear. They rescinded the bill because they said it was outside the purview of the executive order. The bill did go through Congress. And I guess this does bring me to my question.
It vests the authority in the executive. One thing in this bill is it vests the sole authority in the U.S. president to make these determinations, which I...
Right, and that's the key point. Pay attention to that. That's the key point. We are saying why this bill is bad. Because it vests the authority in the U.S. executive, means Congress doesn't have to vote on it. The president can just decide, or I should say more specifically, a part of the president's cabinet can just decide this is a national security threat or this is foreign owned, and then we can get rid of that. That's the problem that we are suggesting here.
I think is a civil libertarian nightmare. If you think President Biden has unfairly, indirectly censored political opposition through the back door of tech companies, then it's probably a bad idea to give him even greater latitude to do it directly through the front door of this law.
I completely agree with the sentiment. I just have read that. I completely agree with the sentiment. And you know that this has been my cause du jour long before anyone else has even come along the trail. We were demonetized. I've been on YouTube since 2009. 2006, I've watched it grow. I agree with everything you've just said, except this bill is specific enough that it doesn't do that. And I think you're going to have a really hard time saying, well, this bill is too broad, and then get any kind of traction with the bill that would say, undue influence and the ability to have data transfer to a foreign entity of any kind. This is for specific adversaries listed, a specific type of ownership listed, either it being headquartered or domiciled, something that specific. If we say that that can't happen, something more broad has no chance in hell. That's a worry.
Yeah, so I respectfully, and there's a good dialogue. I just respectfully disagree with that because it's too specific in some ways and too broad in others. It's too broad in the authority that it gives the U.S. president to make a determination, and it's randomly specific in a way that's specifically designed to exclude the very U.S. companies that lobbied for it. That's where the specificity comes from. Ownership is not the only lever that matters when you have the likes of Google that claimed publicly, told all of us, that it was exiting China under its "Don't Be Evil" mantra, only to see years later that they had Project Dragonfly working with the CCP to create a censored search engine in China that was completely publicly not disclosed, a government contracting project with China, until leaks actually revealed it. The instances with Airbnb, I could enumerate other instances. The specificity was paid for by the lobbyists to carve out U.S. companies from being excluded, the very U.S. companies that are threatened by TikTok's growing market share, not by TikTok's actual behavior. Versus the actual breadth and specificity is this. If a U.S. user has not expressly consented, not in some litany of general warranties that you just sign at the bottom through an adhesive agreement, but specific express consent to have their user data transferred to a government, either domestic or foreign, then a company cannot do it, period. I think it's that simple. And I think if we go to the hard nuts and bolts of the real issue lurking underneath all of this, which is the data privacy and who owns the data of individual users that we're handing over to all of these tech companies, from TikTok to Chinese-owned to American-owned but Chinese-influenced. That's what we need to do. And I think we should have broad bipartisan support. And if we don't, it smokes out the reason why. It's because US companies are lobbying against doing the thing that actually needs to be done. And so I don't take that for given, right?
Right. And on top of that, I'd argue it's the same thing as the Patriot Act, which is not just that the lobbyists are pushing it, which is definitely true, but it's also that, I mean, let's be real, the federal government wants more control. This is, in my opinion, actually a very similar debate to that which surrounded the Patriot Act. Okay, remember that thing? Kind of the reason we have NSA spying on us and Edward Snowden and all that stuff in the wake of 9/11? It's pretty simple. Is back then, what were we told? Okay, we need an increased system of surveillance on our citizens in blatant violation, arguably, of the Fourth Amendment, because look at 9/11, look at the terrorists. And a lot of people on both sides of the aisle, but including some people on the right wing, sadly, got up and said, yes, well, the terrorists are bad and I want to live in a safe country and I want to do anything we can to stop them. So I support the Patriot Act 100%. But what was the Patriot Act really about? What do you see it being used for now? Now you have this surveillance state that's used and weaponized by the government against not the terrorists, but against patriots. And ironically, it's called the Patriot Act and it goes after patriots, its own people, right? And arguably, I would say this TikTok debate is the exact same thing. Conservatives say TikTok is bad. Okay, right? TikTok is, China is bad. I agree. The terrorists were bad back then. Of course they were. But you can't just use that as a justification to do anything you want. Okay, because that's a justification that the government sells you publicly. It doesn't mean privately. That's the real reason that they do these things. And again, I think it's the same thing because there's a lot of conservatives, and I guarantee you, actually, we'll cut it off here. Okay, I'll finish on my own monologue. I guarantee you that I'm going to get the same handful of comments, despite the fact we have explained this now twice in the videos, that will still say, well, I don't care. And I don't care what you say about this bill, Vince. TikTok is bad, and I want to see it getting rid of. They're still going to say that, right? And I look at those conservatives and I say, you are the same exact type of people who would have supported the original Patriot Act because it's the same exact logic. You're saying this thing is bad. Most people agree, right? TikTok, or at least the data sharing of TikTok to the CCP, as well as a lot of other stuff, is bad. No one is disagreeing with you, okay? The problem is actually that many of you are not listening to us, okay? You're just basically in this little echo chamber of, la, TikTok is bad, nothing else matters. Because we are saying that, when you read into this, okay, there's a lot of government control that's really happening here, and I once, for a second, third, fourth, fifth time in this video, posed the question to the conservatives out there who will still defend this bill: why does Nancy Pelosi support it? Okay? Let me ask you that question. Why does she? Do you think it's because she wants to go after China? Really? Oh, yeah. Nancy Pelosi, known number one enemy of the CCP. Okay. No, I don't think it's because of that. Is it because of national security? Of course not. She supports the open border. She doesn't know a thing about national security. So if she supports it, there must be a nefarious or corrupt reason, okay? And you can agree with the intention, but you are not in the government, I assume. Okay, I don't think any congressmen are watching this video. So who's going to control what's done with the intentions here? You can look at TikTok and 100% say that it's bad, but if it's bipartisan in DC and many of the mainstream establishment Democrats and the neocons and the entire Uniparty and the deep state and the lobbyists, et cetera, support a bill, that should be red alert in your head. Ding, ding, ding. This is bad. This must not be about what they're saying it's about. Okay. And with that said, folks, let me know your thoughts. This is the second video we will do on this TikTok ban. It may not be the last because this is just an issue I don't think, I honestly, well, from the perception I've seen, most conservatives, once they hear this information, understand, but we will still get the same exact comments. I guarantee you saying, nope, TikTok is bad. I'm on Nancy Pelosi's side here. Okay. And that's not even a shot at Steven Crowder on this subject. I think he has his own reasons, his own arguments, but you have to admit that's a lot of people. That's basically a lot of what people are saying. and it needs to stop. So with that said, folks, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, Alpha Moves only. God bless. A very great rest of your night. If you want to watch the full debate, you can. It's on Vivek's and Steven Crowder's channel, and peace.